So now what we can do is, once we have our plan going, okay, we might also want to start to add some hatches. So hatching is created in AutoCAD by using the hatch dialog box. Okay, so much like the plotting command, hatching is also done through the window that pops up once the command is activated. So if I type in H for hatch, okay, or I can go into my draw menu here too, what's going to pop up is basically my options for creating a hatch. So these are preset hatches, okay, within AutoCAD to choose, and you'll have to adjust the hatch to your drawing as well as the angle of the hatch within the dialog box. So by default, this ANSI 31 is our hatch, and that's just a basic cross hatch. But if, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because you can see that this is one of the ways of applying the hatch, okay? And so I'm going to move my mouse out. So to back up, I mean, these are the boundaries that we can create, okay? We can either pick points or we can select boundaries in order to define our hatches. These are our hatches, okay? And again, these are all kind of preset within AutoCAD in order, you know, to give us ones that, you know, basic ones that we use, okay? I rarely use any outside of these. This also has options for transparencies. We're not going to work with transparencies. You can see in the handouts that there's some issues with it. So, you know, they're not really used all that often. They have their issues, you know, etc. We can change the angle of our hatch, and we can also change the scale of it, and that's going to be important when we start to work with hatches. We can also set the origin, okay, so we can locate where we want a pattern to start and stop. And then we can make it associative, and what that means is that if my shape changes, then it'll change too as well. Now, as I said, the default, okay, for picking hatches is this pick points, and what that means is that if I mouse over an area, okay, it'll automatically fill that, assuming that the boundaries are okay for it to read. Sometimes they're not, and you'll find you find that sometimes they'll come up with some red circles saying that it can't find the boundary. Okay, so I'm going to click to set my hatch and then hit escape, okay, to get out of that command. If I want to edit my hatch, if I click on it, it'll bring up my hatch edits again, and this is where I can change the scale. Okay, let's say 5 or 10. Okay, and I can change the angle of it too as well. With these types of hatches, okay, I can keep going, but every time I click on hatch, okay, I may have to, you know, work with my settings again. Okay, so one thing that I can do is I can type in MA for match properties. Okay, click on the hatch that I want to match, and then apply those properties to that hatch so you can match the hatch properties. Or I can click on a hatch and I can add to it by either using the pick points. Okay, and then once I have this selected, hit enter, and you can see that there was an issue with my boundary, so it selected everything. So I'm going to type in U, enter for undo. Okay, so let's see if we can get just one more area. Okay, or what I can do is I can select by objects, and what that means is that if I have a boundary of objects, okay, and this is where you know, it gets really important that you have your objects closed. You know, when you start to work with hatches, because sometimes if you have an open object, you know, either it'll fill up the whole thing or it doesn't recognize the boundary that you're trying to create. So if I want to work by boundaries, okay, if I go to my hatch option and I go to select, I can select the boundaries that I want the hatch to be contained within. Okay, I can also, you know, if I have rectangles or circles, okay, I can choose these as my boundary too as well. Okay, what I find is that sometimes I do have to create a boundary because this pick points is very, you know, no pun intended, very picky. Okay, so it can start to cause problems, and the more it causes problems, the more I'm just like, you know what, I'm just going to tell AutoCAD what to do, and I'm going to create my own boundaries. So that might be a methodology, especially if you have a very complex plan. That might be a methodology in a way that you have to work. Okay, and also what I'll do is I'll break it up into smaller pieces, you know, either with my construction lines, okay, because I find that AutoCAD tends to work best with hatches in well-defined small bites. Okay, so I can take this and I can add to it like that, okay, using construction lines as boundary lines. Okay, if I ever want to change the hatch, okay, now in newer releases it's associated with grips so that I can stretch it okay, I'm turning my object snaps on. Okay, and I can stretch it to certain points on my object. Okay, so that's now a really, really helpful tool that's been incorporated, you know, recently in AutoCAD. Now, one of the things we have to be mindful of is we have to be mindful of our boundaries. Okay, and this is a big thing because, you know, a lot of times when students first start, they don't think of what they're actually drawing. Okay, and they tend to add hatches willy-nilly. So if I type in H for hatch, okay, and I go to pick points, okay, what it does is it defines, let me hit enter, what it does is it defines this swing, okay, my door swing, which is an imaginary line, as my boundary edge for my hatch. Okay, so one thing that's very, very important to remember is that we're actually drawing what should be a real thing. Okay, so in this case we're going to have some sort of a door threshold, and you know, keep in mind that, you know, we need to figure out, you know, how our materials are going to end, how they're interface with each other, and they don't just end in an imaginary line. Okay, so in this case what I would do is I would delete this. Okay, I would take my floor pattern. Okay, so usually hatches are either on a hatch layer or a pattern layer. So if I have a flooring layer or a pattern layer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to indicate that, you know, with a box or with a joint, okay, this is a piece of material that's going to separate this flooring from this flooring. Okay, so that now when I hatch, I'm going to pick my internal point. It's going to be defined to just this space. And then what I can do is I can start to change the hatch that I want. Okay, let's use the net hatch because we want, let's say we want tile. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my scale. Sometimes you have to scale up, sometimes you have to scale down. Okay, and I'm going to make nice big hatches. Okay, and then what I need to do is I need to figure out what's the angle of this. Okay, because if I wanted to go parallel with the walls, that's not going to happen by default. So this is where I would take that line, do a list to try to figure out the angle, okay, which is 76. I would change this angle to 76. Okay, and you can see it rotates it to be parallel with this line. And then what I want to do is I want to set the origin, okay, because I have all these tiles that are kind of these weird sizes, and so I want to create a start point basically in the corner. So if I go to set origin and I click on a corner, it's going to change the hatch pattern to start at this origin point. So it's another really good tool that you can use when you start to you know, insert real hatches, okay, into your files, and they're supposed to represent real materials. Now, one thing is that when we start to talk about you know, how things print on top of each other, especially for using screened or gray lines, what happens with AutoCAD is it doesn't really understand, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't say, okay, I understand this order and I'm going to put them in a logical order. Okay, AutoCAD doesn't work that way. It just basically wants to put everything wherever it wants. So what you'll find is that there's this command called draw order. Okay, and draw order allows you to put hatches or, you know, any other objects, okay, on top of each other if they're not printing out right. Okay, theoretically everything should be a black line, but sometimes you have color or sometimes you have gray lines. Okay, and so if you type in draw order, okay, so say this is gray and it's popping up on top of my black line when I print it out. Okay, if I type in draw order, it's going to select, I can select my objects and hit enter, and then it's going to ask me to arrange them to be either to the front, to the back, above objects, or under objects. Okay, so I can say I want it to be in the back, And what that's going to do is it's going to throw that behind my wall so that this black line of my wall, when I go to print, is going to print on top. Okay, so what happens is that a lot of times hatches are a majority of what's going to cause this problem. So there's a new command that essentially allows you to send all of your hatches to the back, okay, as one fell swoop. So the command for that is hatch to back, one word, okay, because remember spacebar means enter. And then I'm going to hit enter, and what it's going to do, it's going to throw all of my hatches to the back. Okay, this is something that you'll use, you know, probably not as much as in this class as you will outside of this class, but keep in mind that that's the issue, is when we start to print with color or if we start to print with gray, they might show on top of our black lines, and we don't want that. Okay, we want to make sure that they're, you know, behind those. So that's two methodologies how we can be, you know, we can ensure that. So just to reiterate, we want to make sure also that our hatches are on their correct layer, okay, which is the pattern layer. And we can start to add hatches into our plan.